Okay. So, how many more courses do we have in this particular one? Any more classes do we have in this course?
Say again?
We've got 3, right?
Is that more? How many more you have, or is that how many you will have achieved?
Is it for the year or the semester?
No. How many more classes in this Master Business Process 1?
One more.
You don't sound so sure. Yeah, this is a abbreviated course we have tonight, and then so you're on third base right now. And next week you will finish up this course, the Master Business Process course, which is kind of like a toll gate, sometimes they call it. And there's another course called EDU, not EDU, it's a development course that you'll have later on, one of those that basically will be also shorter in length. And so, and then you'll be off into your next course or next after this. So I'll talk a little bit more when we get to the last slide. I've got, I'll send you a copy of the slide here and about schedules, because next week will be a mentoring session, that which the team that you're in will meet with me on a kind of a one-on-one basis. I want to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about your specifics within your team and the project and where you are, and cover then also the team projects you've developed so far, in conjunction with our discussion about, you know, how your team is doing and team dynamics, and I'll talk about the schedule at the end of that. So that will be a requirement. And then also I'm going to cover tonight with you establishing an account called the Tracker. And it basically is a repository of the project work that you'll be having, be developing throughout your core curriculum. And it is where you'll park your slides. The ones that you will do the briefing on next week will be uploaded into your Tracker. And I'm going to cover that about, you know, how you establish that account, and then just to ensure you're comfortable also with filling out the information that will be in these trackers. And so those are some of the things I'm going to cover with you tonight and the way ahead. So let me ask, anybody have any questions on the outset here you'd like to ask any questions on, or matters of interest?
I've got a question, Professor.
Is that Jay?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
My question is, for the Guiding Coalition, how many people can you have, or is there a number?
Oh, no, there's, and this is will be unique to every team. Often you have to have a senior champion, right? You have to have somebody that is the authority to implement your recommendations.
Yes, sir, that'll be my commander. But for the Guiding Coalition, I'm looking at 12 to 15 different people.
Okay, the way to think about this is that, and you're going to cover again in your project management course a little bit more about doing what's called a stakeholder register. You'll be developing basically all the people that influence your project. And we'll talk about it in that course. I'm not teaching that course to you, but you'll talk about who are the ones that you have to basically, using a tool called RACI, and it stands for who's responsible, who's accountable, who's got that you have to consult before you make a recommendation. In other words, you have to get their opinion, and then who you just need to keep informed. You'll have more about that later on. But the other folks you're thinking about, this large group, who would they be?
Are you talking about the Guiding Coalition?
Yeah, the 10 to 12 you were mentioning.
Okay, we got a chief, a senior, and then we have a lot of AFITS reps. We got GE, Rolls-Royce, Dowdy, there's a couple of more, and they're representatives of different parts that go on this aircraft.
Okay. And are they folks that you want to get their inputs because they're like subject matter experts, they really know
Yes,
this
sir,
stuff?
absolutely. I talked to a
Yeah.
couple of them today. Because even though they're all the parts come to that one aircraft, each one of those guys, their company, they take it's a different path, a different way they order it, and a different way it comes to us.
Uh-huh. Now, are there any of those in there that are they going to be working alongside of you, or you know, throughout the project, giving you information, that type of stuff, or are they?
Yes, sir. We're in the same building.
Oh, okay, all right. Are any of them involved? In other words, are they making decisions about your project? In other words, there's going to be particular areas that you know, they'll give you a yes or no on.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good. Now what we're doing is defining this by using this tool called RACI, because if they're involved in decision making, in other words, they can implement your recommendations, and you have to run it by them. Often what this is in this tool we call RACI is that if they have to be consulted before you make a decision or before you go forward to it, often there'll be this C in this RACI. In other words, the ones that you want to talk to, you want to get their inputs on before you make any decisions or recommendations, because they're probably the ones who are going to have to live with it, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now your commander would be the accountable, which would mean he should be the sole decision maker. In other words, you get all these inputs and you guys come together, you know, work as a team, and then he's got the decision authority. So, and you usually just want one person being accountable.
Yes,
in this case, it sounds like a commander. So these guys will probably be the C, which means that you want to include that. And later on, you're going to make a stakeholder register. Now,
okay.
the guiding coalition is, and why we call it that, are the ones that often you have to give your reports to, like on the overall project. And, you know, you brief them on where you are, where you're going to go.
Okay, okay, I see now.
Huh?
I think I understand it now. I think I had it mixed up.
Uh-huh.
For my guiding coalition, I probably have maybe 3.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, because it's a little large guiding coalition to have it, because they're the ones that you want to, you know, brief them about maybe the entire project and where you're going.
Yes,
now, there'll probably be parts in there, maybe you talk about how you improve a process or supply or you know, some aspect. So those guys would be C's that you want to consult, and the guiding coalition are usually the ones that are important for decision making or keeping abreast of the entire project. That's a good way to think about it.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. And and we do this, by the way, folks, with all of you, to talk about who the key players are in the organization and what their roles are, because up front, you want to establish that, because the worst thing you can do in any case, and we've had a couple of teams doing it, and I've got a lot of life experience in these type of problems, is that you end up with more than one boss. You know, you go in and find out that 2 people think they're in charge of the same stuff, and you as a team trying to figure that out, and you don't want to figure this out, you know, late. You want to do it at the very beginning of the project. Who's got the roles, who's going to be in charge, and you define that, and maybe even expectations. Because when you guys, one of the things we talked about, I think in a lot of the feedback I gave you in your last discussion question about roles of the champion, is that one of them is to participate in progress reviews, and that you want to keep them abreast and all that. And so those people that are involved in those IPRs or in progress review that you should do as a team on a regular basis probably would be part of your guiding coalition and or to your senior champion. So that's the other way to kind of think about this, is who you're going to be interacting with and discussing the good stuff. So, okay. Jay, sound like we're on track?
sir.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. Let me take a quick look at the chat room. Yeah, okay. Hey, Dave, did you want to say anything, or looks like you're talking about failure mode analysis. Hey, Dave, you got your ears on?
Yeah, I'm on. I didn't type anything in there. I can't see
Okay.
the chat at the moment, though.
Okay. I think Matthew had a question, and he was asking about failure mode analysis. We don't cover that tool, but it's really a great tool to have when we talk about risk a little bit later on about how do you look at and quantify that. We don't cover that tool, but we'll talk maybe a little bit about it in our mentoring session. It's a very handy one, particularly in developing risk. And again, we're going to kind of introduce some of these topics, and then we're going to build upon them in follow-on courses. And again, in project management, which has a lot of tie-ins, particularly at the very beginning of your project, there is a thing that we'll expand upon, and when we go from the failure mode analysis, we'll talk about risk analysis as it applies to project. And often there's a risk register. There is quite a bit of things that are involved with that, like identifying triggers, mitigation, we look at severity, a lot of different other factors. So we revisit some of these things here, kind of introduce them here. Then as you get some more information from the organization, and then we apply some of the project management tools that overlap with the typical Lean Six Sigma tools. So you guys have a kind of an integrated view of these different techniques, and a lot of times like the project management phases and the Lean Six Sigma phases, like the DMAIC and the 5 steps of the project management, they overlap, but they have some uniqueness to it. So we want to be sure that you can look at both of these and hybrid the tools in a very effective fashion, and using them in conjunction with each other is where the great good power of these things are. All right. Anybody else? If not, okay. Let's see. Judith, got it. Thank you. Be safe. Hey, by the way, just my policy, and it probably ought to be for every faculty, that if you guys are driving, you get the key, you just went to a daycare center and your kids are screaming in the back, or, you're out running an errand or on a mission, or, night shift, or, got deployed or something like that with an emergency, just let me know. I much prefer to have you coming back for the next course than, being the cause of any accident or unsafe act. So please don't, put yourself in any type of danger. It's usually in the afternoon, you're tired, late. I've had some students, they've been, knowing you're doing some of those type of things that, so my first rule and first priority is your safety. And so don't ever, drive and try to do this as well and you're distracted. I prefer take the safe course and then just review the recording, or and by the way, if you have any questions about any of the recordings, what we covered, be glad to entertain your questions, after you review that. All right. The materials that we have tonight, and it's kind of light as well, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the key things that in reviewing your assignments. There's a couple of you, I think I still need one or two, either a feedback on your problem statement or your last discussion question. I think I've got all the problem statements that were submitted graded. I just need to upload them and give them your feedback. And the DQs, I think there's some of you I still need to do one or two feedbacks on your second week DQs. What we'll do is, one of the areas I wanted to just kind of reiterate, and when I looked at your problem statement, you really had a lot of great insights, by the way. And taking the scenarios, it looked like majority you took. There's about 3 of those problem statements that you guys tackled, and basically, your inputs on there were around. I think most of you took. There was one around the casino, another one about work processes being ineffective, and let's see, what was the other one? Oh, yeah, about the overproduction seemed to be the class favorite of all the ones, and a few of you ventured into one or two of the military examples. And so these were real world problem statements, and they were not generally refined. In other words, they were the ones that were kind of at this same level with the first time you submitted them, your problem statements. This is kind of like where they were for the most part for the NGS students, so you kind of see where they were. And I want to just kind of reinforce a few things. One, and in many of your comments, you talked about like challenges around problem statements, is that finding the right balance of specificity of your problem statements is really important. And it's kind of a balance, if you will. And that is what I mean by that. Well, you want to have it so you can really narrow down about what you're working on. And typically, most NGS students, when they first start, need an appetite suppressant, you know, or their champion does. Like, we want everything, and when do you want it? Well, can you do it, you know, next week? But the typically is that they're too global. Is that we're taking on too much. And some of you, you know, initial problem statements, I think you got it pretty well focused. And I generally recommend to you as teams to start more narrow in your focus, and then we can expand it later on. In other words, it's a lot easier for you to add things onto your problem statement, like maybe additional departments or facilities, or perhaps product lines or geographical locations. So it's easier to do that. And one of my objectives is ensuring you have something you can get your arms around, and you can do it by graduation. Now that's the part you just don't have any insight. You don't have any idea between now and graduation what's doable. And that's where I come in and give you my, 25 cents view about what is doable. And that's why I want to have a discussion with you next week. So we're clear about the scope. And that's why we start to use these tools around the problem statement. Because I think, Ron, you mentioned, use of tools like discovery tools and things like that. And that's what I want you to think about, that don't look at each one of these tools in writing the problem statement as being separate. The real value, again, is their integration. So if we start writing a problem statement and you look at your macro flow chart and say, okay, here's what's included, here's what's excluded. Okay, so you're now describing, the where, that involves these product lines, this location, and it's a real great visual. So you think about that. And then you think about, well, what else do I need to think about? And there's going to be a couple of things we'll cover tonight. One is the CRM, the Customer Requirements Matrix. So we're not only taking the input from the champion, but you're going to also maybe consider, as you draft this, what are the customer's requirements of this process? What is the needs of whoever uses this product or service that you guys are working on? What do they think about it? And what's important for them? And more importantly, what is important for your success in delivering not only what your champion wants, but ensuring that he's serving or she is serving the champions that are the customers that they're missioned to serve, and that your product, takes care of all these requirements. So that other perspective, not just what's the internal thinking about this, but what's important to the customer. That's one of the other tools. It's really important in helping you think through the problem statement. And even the force field analysis can contribute to that. So using these variety of quality tools, before you start to finalize your problem statement, we're going to be thinking about because a lot of times, if you think about, and well, we'll cover this in the CRM, is what's important is the perspective that you're using. And a lot of times, just bringing other ideas in about this, and maybe even not only what your champion was, but maybe talking to the day-to-day or the coalition folks, and kind of see and blending that in, often gets you to a better problem statement. And one of the challenges of this is really figuring out not only what are, and I think Matthew had a great point in his narrative. He said it's about outcomes, and many of you, I think, several of you mentioned that as well, but I just don't recall exactly who, but I do remember Matthew writing this, and about establishing goals and outcomes. And when we wrote had you do the exercise, and many of you said, well, there's like 5 problems. Well, yeah, you could be. It's like, it's overproduction, it's use of space, it's lack of, delays and all those type of things. And one of the things, if you notice, several of those examples didn't have any quantitative data in it. In other words, they didn't have, we need, reduce overproduction cost, for instance, but they may have talked about that. So there wasn't a number in there. And what you have to do is figure out, of all those outcomes, which one maybe is the central one. If I was to fix the overproduction and rework, issue, or whatever that might be, and then you say, okay, if I fix that, will I be able to fix the other, key indicators in here, the other key outcomes? And is this the central one? If I fix that, will I be able to reduce, by improving the quality and improving the rework, will that decrease all these other problems that we have? So you kind of think about it in that way. And that becomes then a priority of all those outcomes. A lot of times, just sitting down and thinking about the problem statement, it's not only, the whats and wheres, but it's getting people to agree what's the priority that you got to deliver. Sometimes people, yeah, I want it now, or I want it at this point. We want to improve all those things. And they say, hey, I want to improve all those things. And a lot of times then it's a disagreement about which one of those are the priorities. So sometimes in doing that central metric, which of these things, cost, quality, or time, is maybe more important to improve, and having that discussion up front is very vital for you and your success, because when you write your problem statement, you're also establishing the criteria that you will measure the goodness, the success of your project. Okay, you're going to go back at the very end of this, course you're in, and say, okay, here's my problem statement. This thing was, overproduction was at this level, or it was working at this level, and we decreased it by this %, or we decreased cost by this, or whatever that might be. So you're defining success, and it's been my experience, and maybe many of you who've done these projects, is that this is not a constant. It is a subject to dialogue that you want to have with the champion on an ongoing basis. You want to have and say, okay, we can fix this. Is this really the priority thing? And often it changes over time as you have this, get more data, and you have this dialogue about what's important. You should be getting guidance back from the champion. And that's why these IPRs are so important, is that it's just not giving them, here's where we are and about your progress. It's also having a dialogue about what the outcomes still look like. And it might change over time, or they may be hit with a new set of priorities from the higher headquarters or something like that. And so you want to stay in dialogue, and with managing, this is a huge part of any type of quality improvement consultancy or internal black belt program or anything, is managing the relationship and the needs and requirements with your champion. That's why we write these things in this fashion. And so sometimes you can't get to the initial goal. It's just too far. And so you negotiate with, hey, how about we give you some interim improvements, some short-term things, but we really can't maybe hit the goal that we talked about before. And that allows you to understand where to put your priorities and that type of thing. So, and that's why I also recommend that in your IPRs, if you do this as a team to as much degree that you can. In other words, if you can conference call in when you're doing these progress reviews with the champion, so they meet you, know you, but it's amazing how differently each one of you may hear what the champion has to say. And sometimes you'll pick up things in this dialogue that you're having in briefings with the champion that your fellow teammates may not have caught, and particularly those that are in the organization very close, they may not pick it up. I'm doing a series of assessments right now. We're doing interviews. I always try to go out and at least in a dyad, at least 2 of us, whenever I do interviews. It's amazing, after we leave that room, we talk to the same individual. We have basically the same questions. We've both taken notes. And then after the end, we sit down and compare notes, and it's like, wow, you caught some really good points that I didn't. And so that will be true I think in every relationship that you have, it's just human nature that we are tuned in to different things. And sometimes champions are tuned in to different people as well. Some people, they don't understand something, and one of you maybe can explain it a little differently or have a different perspective. So it enriches the champions relationship. And so I do encourage you that we're going to ask about what your relationship is with the champion. Have you been able to meet and get together regularly as a team and provide information and that type of thing? If you can't be there, in other words, you just can't get your schedule wrapped around a time that's convenient, that you all can brief the champion in the fashion. At least then you maybe send them, maybe a little note or some information from the team. It's good that that you ensure that you have visibility. That's not just on the student that's there in the organization, but you also, the champion may see contributions from the entire team, and so little techniques like that really it enhances your ability to manage the sponsor and the champion and to work as a team. So this kind of tips as we go through this. And a lot of times, going back to the drills that you had and doing the narrative. For instance, there was many who wrote about the casinos. Well, that really wasn't a process at all. They were just saying we're behind. Okay, we are behind in where we should be in the casino compared to our peers. We need promotions. We need exciting stuff to bring people in. Well, what's the process there? And if you thought about it, could you visualize a flow chart? What are we working on? What's the scope of this? And the team just couldn't do that. So that, and they start looking at that and say, hey, well, we can't fix that. That really is more of a marketing type of activity. And we don't have those skill sets within our team to figure out what's new and exciting, which is very subjective. It's very, you can't measure that. How do you measure exciting? In a way that will allow you at the end of this to say, hey, we increased your excitement by 10 points. Okay, well, so when you start thinking about that, start applying it, it really changed the focus of the team. So as you thought through it, and I'll give you feedback. I haven't uploaded it yet, but these problem statements were really in kind of the first stage. And so I want you to think about these things, and then we'll talk about them in your particular circumstance as we move forward. Any other insights or questions, when we talk about the problem statements or the context, or because I know that the question, the DQ was, what are the roles and responsibilities of the champion, but I also provide in your feedback just some tips that I think is important for you as teams to do, in managing that and helping you explain their roles and responsibilities. And one of the ones I firmly believe in is that one of your roles, and particularly for those who are working in organizations that may not have champions that are schooled in Lean Six Sigma, may not know what the DMAIC model is about. One of our outcomes, and particularly as you go towards a black belt type of certification, is that you need to not only understand it, but you need to be able to convey it. You need to be able to instruct. You need to be able to educate. In the case of senior people, it's called coaching, but it's kind of the same concept. Is that if you can explain, for instance, that we are now in the define phase, explain the DMAIC model. Here's our approach. We're using this proven model methodology coming from the Lean Six Sigma world that's proven to give success if you follow the steps. And here's the first element of that. We're in the define phase. This is what we're doing, champion. We're going to scope this thing up. We're going to talk about the risk to our project. We're going to engage you and get customer information, and let's go through this process of identifying what you want as success for this project. So if you can do that type of stuff in your IPRs where you're educating and not just, getting information, but it's important. And for some of you that may not have a lot of depth experience in Lean Six Sigma, and many of you and on these teams have huge amount of experience, is that try explaining it, what this means. And if you can do that, like with the champion or to your fellow student members, it will greatly improve your ability to have confidence in your ability to explain these things and to use them. And if you can teach somebody these concepts, then that's really, really important, because that kind of gives you a level of expertise. And so you get to try it out with me. As I go through, I'll listen to you, what do you think it is, and see where you are, coach you up a little bit on that. But I do recommend then, and not the same person always just does the briefing back to the champion. Often it's the student that's there, is that take turns and just take this opportunity in a safe environment, because this is part of the learning experience. So I encourage you to think about that in your approaches. Okay. Any other questions? Anything like that at this point? Before we actually get into the course material, let me see if I can show you the. Let's see if I'm still up. The tracker. This is a. Let me know. Do you see on your screen kind of a pie chart?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. Once you get signed in, each team should establish an account. Oh, okay. Only one individual will reach out. There should be in the course materials section in the portal a request link for the tracker. This will go to Elaine Moore. Elaine Moore is our IT director. And one individual, or the lead, whoever's going to, the team lead or designated point of contact from each team just needs to do this. And you'll establish an account. In other words, Elaine will send back to you for the account, and you'll set it up using a password. It's basically a Quicken database, and it's, again, established. I think NGS initially established this for the Coast Guard, because they had Coast Guard-wide contract, and they wanted to be able to have all these projects the Coast Guard was doing, so they can go back and refer to them and make it available to a broader audience than just the folks that would their students that were coming through the NGS program. And from that became, well, expanded to all NGS teams. And in this, you'll establish an account, and this is kind of the first screen when you log in. Mine may be a little bit different from yours as a faculty member. And so, and what it does, it allows us to basically have a historical record of your tracker. And let's see, I'll just pick one here at the top. And this is where you basically will set it up. It's add a project, right? And it'll take you to a screen. And then there are these fields that you will fill out. And where it says edit up here, where you'll put in the information in here, like the project name. So you'll have a name of your project, and that there'll be then where it is, what status is this. I'll put that in, whether it's the proposed status, or if it's been accepted, as a viable, project. And we're still in the proposed area right now. Until we kind of get the problem statement well defined, the scope down, and we know that the champion is comfortable with this, and the team, which is, we have various stages of that at this point. It'll be in the proposed, and I'll turn that into more of a, what stages it will be. And then you add some of these other type of things in here, like the team members, who the sponsors. Last time you did the executive review, and I will review this. You add your data champion and senior champion information in here. Okay, and this is how it looks when you start to fill out. You have your team name, a summary of the project, which basically probably will be your problem statement, or a summary of that, very similar. The initiative, there's a drop-down menu about what is involved with sponsoring department. There are some drop-downs, but you choose one that's pretty close to the ones you do. Now, your class location, in here you'll put in MS 317. So you put your cohort, and you're online. We do have some courses that are classroom-based, so online 317. Okay, and I'll be your faculty member, so that's what you'll put in here. And your class location will never change, and then your senior faculty, which will be me, will not change as well. And then you add, for instance, your team names, the executives, so you add this in there. So we have contact information. I mentioned this is where the status is, and there's different stages. Master Business Process 1, 2, and 3 are typically the stages. And then later on, for instance, on this project, they had a projected return of investment about $250,000. You don't put that in there at this point. You'll have a financial class later on, which that number will be derived through some other different formulas. You can put an initial estimate at this point, but you can then change it later on when you go through the course. So don't be too concerned about ROI, but all of the projects for NGS, there will be an ROI. And so any risks to the project, other considerations may be important to understand, like, sensitivity of information, etc. And then in here, we will see at the bottom is where you will add then basically various slides, PowerPoint, as you go through your course. So you'll be adding into this. Absolutely required in there will be your first set of slides that you'll upload from your team discussion next week. So you'll have an entry in there. And then as we go through this, there'll be things adding. And typically in the syllabus, they'll tell you you need to put it into the tracker. But at a minimum, in the courses you'll have with me from here on out, every one of those courses, you want to be bringing your slides up to date. And what's going to happen is that you're going to build your story in these slides. You're going to go through that, and then you'll have, here's the define phase, and you'll have slides from your measure phase and analyzing, and you will follow that format, by the way. Your briefing will follow the DMAIC process, and here's the things that you generated in support of each one of those steps. And so as we go through these will be cumulative. In other words, you add slides to it, and then you'll have an opportunity to brief these in our sessions, and this again will be your final briefing, will be an oral PowerPoint presentation. So any questions about the tracker? What I would like to do for you is that we've got 3 teams at this point. I mean, we've got the teams established, and I would like to have one individual from each team just send a request to Elaine Moore using that link that's in the course materials. And I would like for you to just, if you can, get that and then set it up. In other words, fill out the information as much as possible. And if you have any issues or challenges, let's talk about that in the mentoring session next week as well. So if you will, make that submission, do it next day, certainly by Friday, so Elaine can get it back to you and you have a chance to take a look at and see what questions you may have in setting this up. Okay. Any questions or around what we call affectionately as a tracker? Good to go, huh? Okay. Let me get you back to lesson 3. Okay. Many of you are familiar. Let's talk about. We're going to talk about really 2 tools tonight. Anybody know what SIPOC is? What it's used? Any of you use this in your quality journeys or use it as part of your toolkit?
No, sir, I never used it.
Okay.
I've used it before.
Cameron, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What is it? Yeah. And where did you use it?
I used it last year for the bachelor's program, and I've seen a couple of them at work before. So.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Anybody else been SIPOCing? Okay.
I kind of used it as well for a cell design that they were working on within our company.
Okay. Yeah. It's one of those tools that really adds kind of a high level. It's a view of your project. It's like a 1/50,000 foot view of your project. And, you know, when we talked about in our first class, being able to think about any organization, any improvement opportunity in a systems view, and is very important because everything in an organization is interconnected. It's just like your body, right? You know, everything inside of you, hands, head, organs, all connected and influence each other. And organizations are kind of like that. And so understanding the various components and their interrelationships are extremely valuable, because sometimes you'll go through this process of trying to figure out a process, what that is, and improve that. But if they're getting garbage from their suppliers, you know, and you haven't thought about that, you know, it's like, you know, the neighborhood pizza, you know, if they didn't manage their suppliers very well, you know, they may have big issues and what they could do. You know, if they've got a lot of expenses with farmers and with their fresh vegetables, and they've got storage area problems with where they keep their boxes and fresh food, and, you know, they weren't able to use it in time, things spoil, and, you know, and if they manage their suppliers by a just-in-time type of delivery where they didn't have to have the extra storage space and they still got fresh foods, and they put the onus on the supplier versus them, you know, sometimes that's something you got to think about. And you actually have a course in supplier management, a rather good one, I think. A lot of the students say they get a lot of gain. We don't emphasize supplier management to a large degree in your projects because typically suppliers are outside the control of your champion. They are usually on contract. You know, let's say you got additional mechanics, or you got people that are providing material, or you've got contractors working there. Is that we usually don't have the NGS teams focus on those relationships because they are usually contractual, and there's some legalities when you're trying to bring in an outside team. And, you know, let's say I need to go interview suppliers about your procedures. Well, the supplier may come back and say, well, that's not a part of our statement of work. If you want us to participate in your improvement project, it's going to cost you this extra dough. Okay. And so, or you talk to one supplier and then they get the perception that they're a favorite, you know, and then they have a competition comes up later and they took an NGS team, told them or relayed to them. It just gets messy. So we usually don't get into supplier management in the first part of these courses. We'll focus mainly on the internal aspects. And we don't get into you necessarily evaluating or talking to customers. We're going to talk about that tonight. That this is going to be important. And how you manage that aspect. But typically, most of the NGS teams do not contact the external customer because there's some liabilities as well. If you don't, get a sufficient sampling size, if you don't, you start asking questions of the customers and you don't get to all of them, or the questions are not crafted right. Sometimes that is also a very sore point. Now, if you're doing this internally and you don't have any of those restrictions, you're the internal consultant and you've got permissions to go do this because it's important. That's great. And many of you may be asked by your champion, hey, I want you to go out and talk to your customers or talk to your suppliers. I'll make the provisions. We got good relationships. So these are tripwires that I want to talk to you about before you move out. Be sure that you don't cross any of these things in the role that you have as both students and change agents for these sponsoring organizations. So kind of having said that, again, it's a high level. And what we're going to look at is the suppliers, what are the inputs to your projects, what is the actual process to transform those inputs into outputs, which is important, and then who are the customers and the requirements. So this SciPoc, we've got a couple of things. We'll give you a few examples, probably the best way to do this. In the suppliers is think about your project and are there suppliers involved? In other words, are there, if you're working on, certainly, like the aircraft, well, if you got parts, you're getting those in from someplace. And so, and same thing with materials you have. If there's raw materials coming in, or there's a shop that gives you non-finished product and delivers that to you, well, who are those folks? And as I mentioned, some of your organizations, we had a UTC like tool inventory we worked on. Most of the tool inventory calibration procedures, for instance, were members of UTC, but then they had this contract element that did assisted and worked right beside the folks in UTC, but they were listed, but they were out of scope, for instance. And this is, again, part of the scope discussion. When we go through this, we're going to ask you, are there suppliers involved with the process? If so, to what degree? And what are your permissions in regarding to how do you interact with them? Can you get data from them? Can you ask them questions, et cetera? So you want to list that then. And then, what do they provide, whoever those suppliers are? And typically, almost every one of your projects has, suppliers, and then they provide something into this. Whether it's a service or whether it's a manufacturing, just about every, this SciPoc kind of is helpful. And then you can put your, not the detailed flow chart, but your process in here. And what you want to do is kind of do as a summary level. The intent, again, for the SciPoc is to cram everything in on like one sheet or one slide, because you want to show the big picture and the relationships to these things. And what comes out of this project? What comes out of this process? What is the intent that we, outcome or outputs that come out of that? So you list those. And then the customer group is when, who is then using these outputs? Who are using these products and services? And this will then be a very good tie-in to another tool we'll talk about tonight, is to the customers, right? You can go right from that to the CRM, the Customer Requirements Matrix. Then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what those customers' requirements are on these outputs. What do they expect from this organization? What does success look like to them? And so this is then just an example of how one would look and how you put it together. In your briefing, and the reason that we do the SciPoc, one is that it helps to provide scope. What's involved with this project, the who's involved with this, what's involved, it allows you to then describe all these. And a lot of times, and just laying out who the customers are, is something that some organizations haven't really done, or they haven't really renewed their requirements and don't have a good focus about what they currently want from you. So this is an example that you'll put together. We'll kind of walk you through others as well, but this will be one of the requirements for you to develop before we do our briefing next week. Okay. And then here's some things just to further expand what we were talking about. Keep in mind, the focus of your project is what you define it and agree to with your champion. And so if an organization is giving you something, like for instance, organization we work with have basically one organization develops policy. Well, who are the inputs for the policy? Well, they got to go through higher headquarters policies, they go through legal review, they've got to include subject matter experts, and then they develop this policy with all these inputs. And so it had many different inputs from a wide variety of different sources, some internal to the organization, some external. Sometimes somebody in the manufacturing, the warehousing crew delivers a product to you, and then you do something with it, and then it goes on to another department. So that's the supplier customer. So keep in mind that suppliers not necessarily the ones external to the organization. They may be external to the focus of your project, and that they are working on that. And so that's then, as you described, not necessarily does it external to the organization, but external to the focus of your process. And it's interesting that it's kind of funny that you can have a supplier is also a customer. And I want you to think about that for a minute. Can any of you think of an example where the customer is also the supplier? Any of you can think of a circumstance like that, depending where you are on the transaction chain, in other words, you can be a supplier and then you'd be a customer. So I want you to think about that. Does anybody can give an example of a circumstance where somebody is both a supplier and a customer?
I can.
Cameron? Okay.
So would this be an example of so if production or an operator built something and then I go to inspect it and then I stamp off saying that, they finished that process correctly and then they carry on with finishing that product, would that be an example of a supplier and customer?
Yeah, it may be. Yeah, because what do they provide as inputs? That's why you kind of think about it. What are the inputs they provide, and then what are the outputs? Yeah. So it seems to me that kind of what you described has that relationship. Hey, Jay, let me ask you a question. Are you still there? Or those who are working on Jay's project?
Yes.
Where do the aircraft come from that you work on?
Where does it come from?
Yeah, comes out of the sky, right?
With the aircraft we've got here, we got the new C-130J, and all the parts come from different vendors.
Yeah, that's true. But who owned those aircraft? Bring them in for maintenance.
I guess the production with the flight line.
Yeah, they come right off the flight line. Are you on right after flight line, or are they out in a squadron?
Oh, when they come from the factory, assembly line, factory, whatever it is, it comes straight to the base, and we get them.
Okay. Oh, so you get them right from the production. You don't get them from XYZ squadron?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. So you're right at the beginning, and then you guys deploy them.
We do.
Oh, okay. So that's production factory, and then supplier, right? And um, that would be then somebody that you then because they go off into the various units after you get them, right?
When we get them, we own them. We keep them.
Uh-huh.
And like you said, if we deploy, if we go down range, we'll send however many is requested, and they go down range. But that's just temporarily. They come back. We still own the aircraft.
Okay. All right. See, and that's that relationship, because a lot of times, like in the military, third level maintenance, depot level type of, or the refitting, whatever it might be, is that the units that own that, unit commanders, whoever, provide them to the maintenance organization. They do their maintenance, right? So, and then they give them back. So at one point, they participate as suppliers. The unit commanders, you have to plan. They give the crew. They give, provide the aircraft. The maintenance folks do their thing, and then they give them back to those same folks. So they're kind of that, combination of supplier and customer relationship. So you might have it both located because the inputs are different. Because you're now, they're giving you aircraft and crews and, whatever that might be. Then you're doing the maintenance and then, supplying it back, and then their level of satisfaction with what you did with it and whether they, you fixed everything that needed to be improved or upgraded or repaired, maintained. So they have a different set of requirements. So even that, it's an example of how the same individuals, flight commanders, would be on both sides, but they have different inputs and they have different output needs, and the requirements are different. So, if that makes sense. Anybody else have any examples to share like that? Okay. And so that's important, is to understand where they are in the transactional chain and where. Let me ask you guys over there in regards to the suppliers that you may have in Dave's group.
So like we have raw material suppliers, and then most of the the components are made in-house.
Okay.
So
and then who do you? Okay. And then who's the ones you hand this off to then?
So the whole thing's built in-house. We bring in raw material. Everything's built in-house, tested in-house, and then it's shipped to the end customer, the aircraft manufacturer, and for assemble into the final assembly.
Okay. All right. So you have a pretty clear supplier and customer relationships, huh?
Yep. Yeah, we control the whole thing from raw material all the way through the process till we ship it to the end customer.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Hey, Cameron or Edgar, I'm not going to ask you, Judith. Who's your suppliers?
We have both vendors from outside, and we have internal, as well as other companies that are owned by UTC but have locations elsewhere outside, either within the U.S. or international.
Okay. All right. And they send it to you?
Yeah, for example, we have one of the companies in an international location will build certain parts that actually get shipped to us here to where we're located. We do the pretty much testing and inspections of things, and then we actually end up sending the completed unit to the actual customer, whether it be the commercial airliner or a different entity.
Okay. Now, do they go in directly, or they go into a like a dock master or a warehousing situation? Do they come to you directly to your area?
For the most part, they first just go to, well, it arrives pretty much to our plant, into our shipping department, or receiving department, sorry, and then it gets processed through them, assigned to the cell, and then it gets brought out to the cell for us to work on.
Are there any contractors involved with your operation there? People that UTC's hired to assist?
Yes, sir. We have anywhere, pretty much even in our quality team and the operators, there are various contractors as well.
So they'll be a part of your supplier list?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good example, folks. You know, if you got both material or equipment coming in, and then you got contract support, you want to list both of those. If you think about contractors as providing services, in addition to the other things, so you want to include those type of things in your list. So if they do touch your project, you know, in other words, they add either a service or there's an input coming from those, like raw material. So it's not just their inputs of hard things, you know, that like material and equipment. It's also services. Okay. All right. And let's see. Okay. Let's continue on just a little bit more, talk about this. In the process map, you want to kind of keep it small, if you will. You want to do the macro because, again, you want to have a high level. And what you're trying to do is, by showing that, is that think about what are the inputs to that process and where do they enter in. So some of those, for instance, you think about the materials and the equipment coming in, is that, well, that comes in maybe as into this entry point into the into your process. Whereas if you look at the contractors, they may be as part of the process steps. So what you want to do when you brief this, it says, here's my suppliers and here's the folks who we've got involved or providing services. And then when you brief the process, again, you're developing scope. Now, here's where they come in. You know, this is the raw inputs we have to be successful, but we also have the suppliers that work these steps, you know, in our project process. And so you're orienting whoever you're briefing in is the relationships of those suppliers to that process. So just don't put it up, but think about the relationship between the suppliers and the process. And say, okay, we have here, and these are the steps where they kind of entered in or used by. And sometimes, you know, they're not at the very beginning. Some of them are introduced, you know, later steps. So what you're just doing is orienting whoever is looking at this high level, 150,000, what are the relationships across these components of the process. And then you list the outputs. In other words, what are we making? What are we doing? What we're producing? What's the value-added proposition of this process? And sometimes that's very clear. If you're in the manufacturing or repair or something like that, that's pretty clear what you're doing. And when you get into more of, well, service industry, white-collar knowledge type of individuals, a lot of times this gets kind of messy. There's not a real clear, you know, what do we produce? What's our value added? And a lot of times, people have very different views about what their value added proposition, what their outputs are. You know, we talk about like developing policy. Well, what is your output? And well, they'll say, well, I don't know. What's the intended effect of this policy? What are you trying to do? You know, who's your customer? And they said them, and then they don't have a clear idea. And so sometimes by doing the SIPOC, you're starting to kind of clean up messy concepts. In other words, we really don't know what we're about. We don't know what how those requirements link up to the customer, because that's the next phase, is that you want to have the outputs at the customer, that where do they go? And they should go to a customer. And a lot of times with organizations that they don't deal with the customer, they're just making it. Right, they're involved with a particular step, and we've had a lot of this, quite frankly, in NGS teams, that people said, "Hey, I'm involved with this. I'm making this widget. I, you know, do this type of work. I'm a, you know, do emergency relation. You know, we bring in things like into hospitals, patients. We bring in insurance claims. We bring in a lot of stuff." And then you start to say, what are your outputs? Because we're doing the emergency rooms, so well, our outputs are, emergency services, health services, life-saving things typically. But they also had other outputs they had to produce, and that was, had to do the paperwork processing, had to do the insurance claims, they had to do Privacy Act filings, and we started thinking about all the outputs that service they provide, that people didn't think about that in that way. The person on the desk thought about it that way, doing the claims and doing the interviews, but weren't thinking about this as an integrated whole and who are the customers of that. Because some of it that they passed on were to insurance companies. And so they were thinking, well, our product is a healthy patient or one that survived the night or, ability not to have mortality. So they started thinking about that in that way. And just listing that is sometimes an eye-opener. So generate from the project you're working on all the outputs that have to satisfy the requirements of those customers. And so this is part of the SIPOC thinking. It just allows you to think things through. And typically, at least for the NGS, this is very helpful for you as a team because it allows you to start to understand the organization a little bit better amongst yourselves about who are the key players. It's helpful for you to understand the organization that particularly those who join another organization outside your normal workplace, is that this will further your understanding about what you and who you're working with. And this really encourage you to develop this as a team and go through this and the SIPOC and understand it. So the lead student, you'll probably be the one that is doing the most on this, but your role in this is to ask questions as well. Just for the reason I just said, that sometimes people within the organization think about products or services in a very narrow way because that's what they touch. So your role as a team is to help your fellow team members identify all the products and services. So you ask, are there any admin, any other requirements that if you're not successful on, will be part of the criteria of success for this project? Sometimes I was talking to a guy, one of our clients runs it's basically a heating and cooling plant. And he said what he has to measure is that when the project is done, that includes the paperwork. A lot of times he had contractors coming in doing work, and they thought that, once they've done the work, they already get paid. But for him, it wasn't until they did all the paperwork that was necessary, not only to get invoiced, but to ensure that there's a document history of changes on these very important pieces of equipment. And so understanding not only the primary outcome, but are there any other secondary requirements that you have to deliver on? And so think about that, if you will, when you're developing the SIPOC for our briefing. And generate then your macro flow chart should be informative and maybe reflective of what you put in for process. And then generate this list, and you may have to go back maybe to the organization just to validate it. And there's a suggested process to think about, okay, let's start from the end. Let's talk about what the outcome is, and that is, who are the customers? What are their requirements? What do they want? What's the process that delivers on those requirements? And then, what are the inputs and who are the ones involved? So sometimes it may be helpful in developing a SIPOC is to go from the endpoint, start with the seed, all right? And a lot of times, maybe that's sometimes, where you should start. It's saying, okay, what are the requirements of the customers? And then, because sometimes what happens, you trip yourself up and say, okay, here's what we got, and this is what they want, okay? And then, but starting back from what they, expect and what they need and what their requirements are, allows you to think through by looking at the process through your customer's eyes. And we talked about flow charting last time. And you've got to make a decision. And most teams will do this from the internal perspective. In other words, what does this process look like from us? in our view. Another way to do a flow chart is from your customer's perspective, right? You know, like let's say you're doing a bank teller process. You come in and the bank teller sees you in line and it says next please, and then you know sees whether you got the the deposit slip filled out or you got a gun in your hand, you know, whatever you're there for, so they're looking at that from the teller's perspective. Whereas if you look at it from the customer's perspective, it may be when they're circling the parking lot and can't find any parking for the bank. Or as they come in, they don't know where to go because they're not there for deposit because they were going to go in there and ask for advice and there's nobody looking at them. And then they stand in line. That's what their process looks like. And then they, then fight the traffic getting out. And so that's a different perspective. So sometimes, in some cases, you've got to make a decision in your SIPOC from what perspective that you're going to even do your project. Whether you can do it through the customer's eyes, or you can do it internal, or you can do a combination of both. And sometimes that provides great value to a project to do both perspectives. And okay, so it allows you then, as you think about this through, again, not only to have the big picture view, but to validate what your assumptions are about inputs and outputs. There is a GIMBA Academy, which I would recommend that you take a look at. Log in. There's a video for that. You can develop through SIPOC templates. You're not required to use a specific one. Sometimes people use a little different templates. You may find research. NGS will always kind of provide maybe a baseline, but I do encourage you to review other tools. I encourage innovation. A lot of times teams will come up with new variations. So this is real world. This is how you do it. There's not a school solution always. There will be general guidelines, and that encourage you to use creative means to develop any of these tools to have in any of these courses, as long as it meets the criteria of what we're looking for. And if you understand the output and how we're going to use these tools, if you know what they're designed to do, then you can really hybrid them. And that's where the great value is, that a lot of times you'll take good ideas from one tool or one approach and you hybrid it on something else. You add, like a rating criteria into a matrix and made it better, stuff like that. So just kind of guidance about being innovative, as well as ensuring, though, you understand what the tool is designed to do. When you brief these tools, when we have our discussions, I want you to kind of say, here's what the tool's purpose, here's its value, this is how we're going to use it. The practical application will be very important as we go through these discussions, not only for next week, but for every week that you go through these courses. Is be sure you give the tool, like if you brief in your slides, that this is what the SIPOC, here's its purpose, and then here's our information. If you do that, you're going to be on safe ground. If you just start talking to the stuff that's on the chart and that describes the use of this tool and its purpose, then you missed one of the key things we're looking for, and that is your proficiency and understanding of the context of this tool in the real world and how will you be using this in the future. If you have that, you'll be really tight. Okay. Any questions, guys or gals? All right. There's some more references. You can go back to the quality toolkit. There's other things. It should be on one side. As I said, the intent is to try to be big picture. You can go on two if you have to, if you just can't figure out the formatting to do so. But don't go to any more than 2 slides in developing your SIPOC. And there's a way to develop it using Excel. There's magic you can do with Excel. I mean, you can make a huge amount of graphics and other things. If you're not really proficient in Excel, like PowerPoint, they're kind of like quality consultants' best friends. If you're into more statistical analysis, Minitab would probably be in that category. But you can do a lot of damage with PowerPoint and Excel in flowcharting and developing graphics. So while you're going through the course, if your proficiency, there's a lot of information out, particularly on YouTube, to do stuff like that. I would encourage you to explore that because a lot of the quality is graphical, visual, and these two products are very good at that. Visio is one of those I would put up there as well. All right, let me talk about another area which is very important. So again, kind of a stream of consciousness, and you know, I know you're listening to me, but one of the things that I would like for you to do as we go, after we go through this, the customer requirements matrix. What do you think is the purpose of that? Why would we want to include, just off your head, what's some of the things that you think would be reasons to use a customer requirements matrix?
It gives you the goals and the expectations of your customer.
Yeah, okay, certainly does. Other ideas? What does it do? What does it provide? And if I could hear from somebody that perhaps hasn't contributed this evening, that'd be helpful. Anybody else have any idea what CRM?
I'd say just getting a clear understanding what the customer wants from your product. You might think that they want this, but really they want, you know, this, something different.
Yep, that's good. Okay.
I'd add about what the customer is willing to pay for in regards to how you use or how you create the.
Yeah, you're talking from a business perspective, you know, is that what are they willing to pay for? In fact, that's one of the big questions. When you go through lean thinking, they'll define value added as what is the customer willing to pay for? And it's just a really great concept because in the business, that's what you're in the business to make money. And if they're not willing to pay for something you're adding on, that's really important. So you put a qualifier. It's not only what they want, but they're willing to pay for. That's great. Okay.
Sir, does this differ by business, or is it applicable to all types of business, this matrix?
Matrix? Is it applicable to everyone?
Or do you tailor it to fit whatever?
Let me see. Was that Judith or was that DeColo?
Judith?
Okay, Judith. Anybody want to help Judith in that answer? Is this applied, do you think, the CRM to all? Do you know? What would your guess be, guys? Does this apply to every organization, every process?
I would think so.
So Cameron votes yes. Okay.
Yep, I would say so too. This is Dave. I'd say you could apply it to any situation.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, you're raising an interesting point, and here's really fundamental. One of the reasons that customer-focused excellence is a core value in quality. Do you know of any organization that doesn't have customers? Is the reason any organization exists is to add value to some customer. And if you think about that and say, for what reason was the organization developed, established? And you start to think about that in that way and say, this is the reason they exist, is to serve some customer requirement. Now, you might, or maybe around tax season, find particularly, institutions or organizations that may be set up that have no customers, right? Because if they're doing it as a write-off, I know folks, that just so they can get the Sam's corporate credit card. You know, they establish their two children as a LLC, and they become you know, a non-existent company that so they can get the corporate membership. But organizations will really exist to satisfy a customer. I really went through a lot of this when I was in the military because, you know, at one time the concept about customer was not universally accepted. It's one of the things that came in with the quality revolution. Go back before the 1980s, and it really was not a common concept. But that is one of the things that came in with quality, is that every organization should be customer focused, because it's really why you exist. And in the military, because, you know, there is no, you know, they were here, you know, like the last 200 years, and most part they think they're going to be around for the next, you know, X amount of years. They didn't really think about that, you know, why do I go out of existence? And so I struggled with explaining these concepts to them, but it made sense to them. And when we finally got through that, this is important, that, you know, one organization supports the other, and they couldn't be successful unless they did that. And that then leads you to, is that, are customers static? In other words, are their requirements the same? And if you think about that, they're constantly changing, and they're constantly changing based on their environment, and maybe not even by influenced by, you know, others that are in similar field. For instance, you know, if you think about it now, if you don't have a mobile app, you're probably going to be behind the power curve. You may have a website, but websites, old news. Those are dinosaurs. They're going the way of the newspapers. If you're not able to communicate on smartphones and you don't have a mobile app, you really are kind of outside the expectation that most customers have. If you're a restaurant or a store and you don't have a website, you start to think, wow, are they even reliable, or are they even, you know, realize they're in the, you know, this century? And so the expectation of that is transferable to other places. And so, you know, we're talking, like I mentioned, a lot of my work is done in the Pentagon, and they were talking that when we have supplies and things, and we are now carrying smartphones, we want to have the capability to have Wi-Fi everywhere. It sounds like a little strange, but when you start thinking about the security requirements within that building, and the ability to have Wi-Fi in some areas and some parts of that building, well, it's not only prohibited from security, is that there's a lot of concrete there. Okay, it doesn't go very far, and it's a lot of thick concrete. So, but they're starting to figure that out, because the demand is, you know, if you don't have Wi-Fi, you're not living in this century. It's an expectation. It's an expectation of all the software that's being developed, a lot of the operations. So that is a requirement. And it's been set not by the environment of the Pentagon, but everybody else's experience in the world outside of that. And so not only are the requirements need to be identified, is that they keep evolving. And in fact, one of the best things if you can ever do, when I go into any organization, said, you know, what's your customer requirements, and how do you know? How do you know you know? And then they will say, okay, yeah, well, and it's been like this forever. Immediately, that should be, your big grin should go on your face and say, that's a target for improvement, because they are never static, and they often change. And if you then do this process and just ensure they're valid and the requirements are there, and that it makes great good sense, not only to, and it's communicated to the members of the organization, but also that you talk with the customers, that is one of the things that sometimes you can really go off on the edge, is that trying to deliver a project on requirements that are no longer important to the customer. And so part of this process is, how do you know this is valid? Have you talked to them last time? You know, how did you understand these are the requirements? And a lot of times they're put into contracts. They're very clear. For many of you in the manufacturing area, this is more of a legal contractual, very well documented. And for some of you, this is going to be fuzzy, right? They may not have a documentation what the requirements are. You know, what does the gaining organization want from this aircraft? How do they, you know, when do they want it? And, you know, What are the things that are going to be satisfying their requirements that may, change over time. So it's important to do this, to identify what they want, identify, and more importantly, that's not much in the slides, but and I want you to include in your charts. I'm going to ask for you to ensure you have a component that's on this chart here. There was one thing that was omitted from these set of slides that I really want you to ensure that you have it on yours, and that is, who are the customers? Okay, and it isn't just normally is that often it is a group of customers, segmentation. In other words, there's more than one customer involved with this. And maybe like I talked about the hospital, they had a customer, which was the patient, which was very clear, but that ER room had many other customers to satisfy. They had the insurance agency, they had the hospital administration, they had, safety requirements, even, to satisfy regulatory requirements. But they had a lot of folks out there that they had to do. And so you break them down. Okay. Now, how do you segment customers? In other words, in a big group, do any of you know what would be some of the ways if you have more than one customer, how would you break them down by into groups? How would you break down a large thing? Okay, here's our customers. How would you break them down? Anybody have any ideas how you might identify groups by unique characteristics or such?
This is Dave. First thing I would do is segregate them into internal and external customers.
Okay. All right. And why is that important, Dave?
Well, definitely have two different requirements. I mean, your internal customers, everybody that gets something from you is a customer. So you have a lot of internal things that you have different requirements for than your external customer. Definitely flows down different requirements to you than what you would have inside.
Okay. All right. And now Dave's point is very important, and it's going to be almost valid in almost all of your instances. One of the things, and this is what Baldrige companies learned, when they started segmenting and developing groups of customers, they distinguished between the external customer that Dave talked about and then the internal one. And the reason for that, if you think about the organization chart of where you work or about the customer or the sponsor that you're about to work for, is that who they serve externally is the reason that organization exists, right? That is the reason they exist. And if people don't agree on why they exist and the priorities of those people that they exist for, then there's a real problem, right? If you don't agree on the customers, and it's amazing. I've been in a lot of organizations, you think this would be self-evident, but we've had strategic planning, or we go through and say, okay, let's take the customer. People disagree about it, or they disagree about the priorities of those people. We're only looking at the big accounts, oh, that's our biggest, we got to focus on those guys. We don't look at the, well, okay. And somebody else says, no, I think we ought to look at the upcoming ones. Those are our priorities. And so it's not just that, it's how they think about those external customers, but do the members of the organization even agree about the priorities of those, and how do they break them down? So external, that's the reason you exist, okay. And then you got the ones that are internal to your organization. And usually those are the ones that come inside that organization box, if you think about it that way. And satisfying that. And if you think about where the scope, you go back to your macro flow chart, you go back to your scope and say, okay, these departments are involved with this, or this department's involved with this process. And anything that is outside that box, right, of those departments or that process, and you deliver a product or service to it, well, they're external, if you think about it that way, to that organization or to that champion, to that outside to the organization that champion owns. And so that is maybe how you redefine it again. So at an organization level, it's the ones that exist, and internally you apply the same logic and say, if they're outside the what the champion owns, you may consider them external to that champion. And then, maybe the champion has different departments or different people working with each other internally under their same control, and then has that internal. So wherever you are, perspective, that's why that's really important for the SIPOC and really important for the macro flow chart. You're now saying who's the external and internal. So that's a great point, Dave, and thanks. Anybody else think about the way you can segment customers?
Geographically count?
Yeah, that's one way. What you're looking for is there's a whole set of criteria you can start to look at. Geographical is one. Dave touched one, internal, external. If they are, for instance, someone that you have to ship a long distance and you have to coordinate, include, on-time delivery means, not when it leaves your warehouse or when it's leaving your shipping department, but rather their arrival, and they're at X amount of distance, and that is different than somebody else. Or perhaps they have a different requirement. If you're involved with developing paint, and you're developing paint for north and south, or hot or cold in climates, and understanding that you have to segment your product by that. So geographical, it may be one. Another, may be by their similar requirements. Okay, that they all want the same type of thing. Maybe we have the people that don't spend a lot of money. That may be a segment. You may be segmenting them by contract level. In other words, level of contract, maybe by their amount of money they spend is another one that could be a way you can break things down. Maybe it's by their different demands. For instance, we had an NGS team was working on delivering cartons, and it was more important for one of their customers to have the cartons done and delivered on time, and regardless of the damage, because you can always add more to it. But if they didn't have it at the time they needed, it was far more important than low quality. And they define damage differently. Even though it was the same carton, they had different definitions of what damage would look like on these cartons. And so one customer group that they furnishing these cardboard cartons to, said damage is defined this way. Okay, it's a ½ inch here, and the foam has to be at this, have no slack in it, and to this qualification. And then same carton had a different set of requirements from them. So understanding even the uniqueness between them. And the reason that you want to do this, that you want to break things down by these groups, is so that you can figure out how to tailor your management techniques to each one of these customers. Sometimes people will say, these people have a lot of idiosyncrasies. When we deliver something, they want us to do XYZ paperwork. And this organization over here wants us to submit it through their electronic system. And so whatever makes those things unique, you want to spell it out. And the other reason for a CRM is that determine not only how they alike, but what are their differences. And so that you can manage them separately. And that's the idea behind that, have tailored approaches. And a lot of times that is different. And you want to recognize both of those. Then you put those things on a sheet, right? And we talk about some of these other factors here. Who the customer is, and if they're a group, what do they want, right? Basically outputs, what product or service do they get? How do they want it? If you think about that, how do they want it? And often that is the difference. In my consulting practice, I work both for large companies and small companies. And this was huge because pretty much, if you want to do a process improvement or you want to do a redesign of an organization or do a strategic planning process, or whatever you were doing, they defined it by outcomes. But the difference was that as a small company, we could give them a personal relationship, right? A personal relationship of trust. And that was one of the things that differentiated our work and our company versus the bigger ones. You know, we would give them something that they couldn't get, and that was how they wanted it. And the quality characteristics of that, sometimes you can say by dimensions, by this amount of defects, or we have to have them shipped within 2 days, whatever those standards are. You describe that, but don't forget the personal aspect. We want you not only to provide us on time, but we want you to explain how to use this. Okay. I just got a trailer hitch, ordered it from a company, got a new car, and I want to put a trailer hitch on it. And I went with the one that actually knew what size of a rise of a ball extension was. It explained to me, well, for the trailer that I wanted to put, exactly how many inches from the ground, and what the rise was, and which one would do this, and how much it cost. I called somebody else, and had the same product, but the person said, okay, we got them in stock. All right, this is how much it cost, and that was it. So guess who I went with? It was information was different. The videos they had online that would tell you how to use this and was self-explanatory was the difference. So don't forget those things that differentiate your product or service from somebody else. And then you say, okay, what do we need to measure for this? What's the important things? I'm not so much concerned now on this on your CRM about the measurements, but looking at what are in the targets. This will come a little bit later, but one of the questions we like for you to fill out is saying, what do you think is the importance of this product or service, as characteristic is to the customer? And how do you know? And a lot of times what you end up doing is say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, this is really important to them. And in their view of the gap, in other words, this to me is like really 5, but I think you guys are operating at like a 3 level. You're not, and it's kind of subjective, but you're getting some idea not only what's important to them, and what's the priority of that. And it allows you then, when you start to go through your project, says we really need to satisfy things that are really important to them, right? And in regards to that product or service. And so when we look at this, say, things are both highly important to them and maybe highly dissatisfied are the ones that you want to satisfy. You really want to ensure you cover in your project. Okay, so most important, least satisfied could be one of the areas that you really focus in on, and then we start to get more specific in your problem statement, and you start to focus on, and what do we have the critical factors we got to deliver on these things to the customer. So there's a lot of information on this chart. The customers and quality and importance and view of the gap is technique. I'm going to show you a couple other approaches to quantify this. Now, and let me just show that. I think we got a series of examples, but I think in the templates we have, didn't have the customer. Be sure you have that. Typically, you want to have the capability to say of the requirements. How do you know? A lot of times it's spelled out in documents, maybe that type of thing, or it's been interviews, sometimes daily conversations, or you find out the requirements, what they really want, when it's sent it back to the to the organization. For instance, we had one team that was working on cakes in bakeries, and they found out the labels weren't sticking. And when the labels don't stick on a bakery item and it goes to the stores, they can't sell it, because if there was any type of like peanuts in that ingredient and it not listed on the label, and somebody buys that and then they get ill, they can be sued. So not only having accurate labels, but ones that stuck is really important, and that they had a lifespan. And so the CRM, they would never know that, because all they looked at when they sent the cakes back and it had labels, and they never gave them the reason for that or the consequences. And people were like, why was that important? Until the team actually kind of talked to them, and what they found out, what they were doing, a lot of things were being shipped, but the the quality department's solution to not having a labels was that they would send a roll of labels for whatever product that that lost its label. So what happened was they were now dependent on that customer who had the bakery, the store. I mean, their people either put the labels on, and there's a lot of risk about whether they put them on the right product or not. So, you know, what they found out was through that discussion, that was what was going on, and that the requirements that had to be from the bakery itself, and it was a defect. Even if we sent them the labels for them to sit on, that was not considered a remedy. The team, when they started talking to the bakery, it just seemed like that was great. I mean, that was the process. Their quality guy was talking to the store quality guy, and they worked this out. And then when we talked to other people in there, we really found out that this was a prohibited practice. So it's very important that there needs to be, and typically is, a dialogue. And so ask whenever you put things together, how do you know what's the source of your information, what the requirements are, and do you understand the background about it? And a lot of times then, as you start to think through, is that when you get this list on this customer requirements matrix, is a lot of these customers are competing with each other. You know, I've got all these guys and gals that I've got to satisfy, and they're competing for our time and resources. And a lot of times, there are different views of the organization about what's important. And it may be with turtling, and it may be different between internally in the organization and with the customers. So a good technique and a way to use this CRM is that once you fill it out, or you have, maybe you can even provide it to something like this, where you fill it out and they do, here's the various things we want. You talk to somebody in the organization and say, what's your view? And maybe on the line, you know, what do you think are who are the customers and their priorities and their requirements? And they give you this and that. And then you talk to maybe the manager, who may give you a different view. And then you talk with the customers and get a third view. Well, you already have a finding that nobody agrees what are the requirements and priorities. And so sometimes, instead of you filling it out, you can take the customer requirements and just maybe have a dialogue with the champion or members of the organization and say, okay, what do you think? What do you think are the requirements? And they just stare at you like this 1,000-yard stare. I don't know. Well, that's another finding, is that if they don't know what the requirements are, then how can they be successful? And do people have the same set of requirements, understanding? And a lot of times that's where the friction in the organization occurs, that they may agree who the customers are, but they disagree about the requirements. So, and then you can see here, it's kind of an example. You can fill out who the customers are. They got internal, external, but I really would like to have a little bit more than that, like what group they are, customer segment. We put the segment in this one here. Again, whatever works for you, but as long as you have customer in there. And they categorize my internal, external. And then, you know, go back and say, okay, are there any other further ways that we can take a look at this? And then what they did is, here's a gap. Here's their, you know, how important is this to this customer group? And then importance and of this product or service or outcome, and then what's their view of that? And then they multiply, you know, this column times that column, and gave them a rank, okay? And so if you start to take a look at that and say, okay, what's the focus of our project? Well, you take a look at the 25s, okay, based on this rank order, and you say, okay, we've got to be sure, part of the success of our project is to ensure that we hit these highest priority ones, and that we agree on success. And this will help you then in writing your problem statement about what do we need to focus in on. Well, the champion said we need to do this, and we need to reduce the overproduction. We need to cut down on our rework. And then you go back in and say which part of these reworks are most important to the customers, and you use this. So that's how you use these things in conjunction. And so here's requirements matrix, another version of this. It says a lot of different things, but again, this one should have the customer listed, and again by segment, but that's different approaches. And These are actually, I guess, from other NGS teams. And any comments? You can do a different way of scoring these. You don't have to use the rank and the priority, but some way to convey, of all the things that are on this list, which ones are the glass balls? Which ones are the ones that if you drop them or the champion drops them, thunder and lightning occurs? And so it's part of the negotiation. Ask the champion, who are you, of your customers. Is there a prioritization of requirements? Is it timeliness more important to them? Is it quickness of delivery? Is there issues around quality? I mean, if you get an aircraft and they do maintenance, for instance, and like one of them went down over here, a National Guard, I guess a wrench got left in, and that's kind of a no-no. Down a multi-million-dollar aircraft based on a $5 wrench. And so quality is probably more important than cost. And I don't know how many checks and balances you put in. It's going to be probably more important in something like an aircraft than the cost of it. So you look at it and say, what's most important for you as a champion from these customer requirements, and then see if there's alignment in the organization under that, and whether or not the customers agree. That's kind of the technique. How much you get to that, to what extent, that would be situational, quite frankly. It'd be ideal if you have the ability to talk to customers and everybody in the organization to see if there's alignment, but you probably won't have that capability. But I want you to just kind of think through, particularly getting this list of customers down at this point. And then later on, when you start to collect data in the measure phase, you'll maybe flush out, maybe validate a lot of this. But it's a really good thing at the very beginning for you to start with. Okay. So here's where we are. Take a look at these various formats, spark your approach. It's up to you. Let me go to the very end here, because we're about at time. And I want to cover our next assignment, then circle back. Okay. Next week, we're going to have, typically they run about 50 minutes. Upon occasion, they may be about 30 minutes. But what I like to do is set up a meeting time that is convenient for you as a team. Now, generally, I'm going to be around, available. You can, as soon as you get your assignments in, you're going to have to do a SIPOC and a CRM for your project. So you need to figure out as a team when you can get these things put together. Now, I'll be available Wednesday for sure at the time that we normally have. And since we don't have a lot of teams, we can go, basically in the same time period. We may be able to start a little earlier, if you want to go, probably 6:30 Eastern be about the earliest I can go, because depending on traffic and things like that, I could leave a little earlier. So starting even a little earlier, let's say maybe start at 7 p.m. Let's do 7 p.m. to about 9. We can do teams in that time period. So if you want to stick with this and have that time frame, that'd be great. I'll also be available on Tuesday and Thursday if you don't have the ability on this Wednesday. Now, if you want to be able to do this at a different time, like noon during the week, to accommodate your team schedules, if that works, like a lunchtime, there may be some possibility for that. I've even done them on Saturday mornings. It stretches a little bit because I got to get grades in after our last course, and I normally need to have that in before your next course starts. So if it works for that, you can even do a team like Saturday morning or something like that, where it's allowed for the time differences. But so we have some flexibility. I need one of you, and you let me know you're about the time that's convenient to you, and I'll try to give you your choice. And what I'll do, I'll send you back a go-to-meeting invite. That will be a confirmation of our mentoring meeting. Okay, and so it's time that everybody in your team should be available. So Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, figure. If we have somebody at 7, the earliest I would go then would be 8 with the next team. Then 9 o'clock would be the next one after that, or if somebody wants to do one on Tuesday, or you want to do on Thursday, or even on the following weekend, that may be a possibility. However, the other thing that's about this, you just need to attend the time of your team. scheduled. You don't have to be involved with the other two teams. So this is a one-on-one, me and you as a team. Any other team, you don't have to attend those other meetings. So that's the approach. We'll go over your charts. I want you to put together, basically your organization that you've got, your guiding coalition, include the problem statement draft in there, with force field analysis, SIPOC and CRM macro flow chart are the things we'll be looking at. And so we'll go through that, have a discussion, and be sure you're clear on how to brief these tools, how you think that may be used, and then we'll talk about the content themselves. So that will be the focus of our mentoring session. This will be the last session that I'll have with you here. You'll have another professor in the next course. I'll see you in Master Business Process 2. However, I want to let all of you know that anytime, and we've got a few things that we need to tie up amongst the teams to finalize, is that you can contact me. I'll be your continuity piece. And again, if there's any disputes or questions you may have with the faculty as you go through this next few courses, and you have questions about, like changing the problem statement or something like that, you say, hey, the faculty thought you need to change, please let me know if there's any conflicts or any major changes for the charts that we've had discussion on. So I just know and stay abreast of your progress. So, and the other thing, please establish a tracker account. In other words, set that up, play around with that before your scheduled meeting. I'd like to have your slides in at least 2 hours for your presentation, whatever time that is. So I'll have a chance to take a look at them and get them queued up before we have our session. And so what questions do you have? Let me stop here. We've covered the content and the way ahead. What are your questions? Okay, don't all talk at once. Okay. You probably are about the quietest cohort I think I've ever had. Any questions about the assignments? Are you confident about what we need to do?
Sir, not quite. This is Judith. I think I'm still in limbo a bit. I don't know if you had a resolution in regards to the issue that we were talking about last week.
Yeah. Edgar or Cameron, have we had anything further from the champions? Any further discussion with them?
Yes, I talked to my manager today, and I gave him all of your info, and he was going to reach out to you either today. Well, I don't know if you've checked your email, but either today or latest tomorrow, and figure out the best path forward. So,
what's your assessment there?
It was still hard to tell. I mean, I think he was kind of leaning more towards keeping it just me and Edgar, just because it would be easier that way. But like I said, I mean, he was going to reach out to you and talk with you about what confidentiality stuff would have to be signed and kind of get your input as well.
Okay. Well, let me, yeah, and are you going to send their contact information to me, or?
I can, yes, if you want me to.
Yeah, because I'm in a place that I'm not often able to get communication with in a day. So it may be better if I can, get a time and a good number, and I can give a call.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. And we'll try to resolve this when we have our meeting session then next week, guys.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Bye. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you do?
No, I just said that I'll be sending by. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Cameron, you got anything?
No, and I was going to let Judith know, I sent her an email as well earlier today, explaining all of this. I don't know if she had gotten it yet, but I wasn't trying to keep her in the dark as well.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anybody going down the list? Takalo, Dave.
Nope, I don't have anything.
All right. All right.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Jay?
I'm good.
All right. Megan?
I'm good.
All right, thank you. Ron? Light up, but not catching anything. Okay. Or Sam? All right. Okay. I saw your mics light up, but I didn't hear anything, guys. So, hey, if you do,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
actually, this is Ron. I'm actually good. Had problem with the mic here.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it. Look forward to our session next week. Send me by email, if you will, your request. That way I can look at my calendar real quick. And just one person from each team. And wish you all a good evening. And may the Caps and the Wizards and the Nats all be successful tonight. I know you guys will be pulling from them all. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. Okay, for the folks hanging on, anybody have any questions of me? Hey, Megan, are you still on? Good to hear.